This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome, listener. Step closer to the edge of what you know. Tonight, we open the shadowed pages of K, a collection of unsettling encounters and inexplicable events. From forgotten corners of the world to the quiet solitude of your own space, these are whispers of the supernatural, tales that twist the familiar into something profoundly unsettling. Prepare to question reality, for the ordinary can hide the most extraordinary horrors. Listen now, and let the darkness unfold. Chapter 1. The Dive. It happened years ago. I remember it clearly. It was somewhere in rural Pennsylvania. I was on a business trip, looking for a cheap place to stay for one night, and just picked a random hotel. The reviews weren't terrible, and most importantly, it was inexpensive. My company provided a fixed allowance for lodging, so I was trying to save a little on my travel expenses. After finishing work for the day, night fell, and I headed to the hotel. It looked old, maybe 4 stories. I recall it being a strangely narrow and tall building. Like any budget motel, the lobby was cramped and cluttered. A strange musty smell even emanated from the cheap red carpet. I rang the bell for the front desk, and an elderly man appeared. I checked in, took the elevator, and went to my room on the 3rd floor. The elevator reeked, too. It was a typical business hotel room, a narrow space with a bed, a desk, and a worn-out chair. I took a shower in the cramped, musty-smelling bathroom, and as I went to sit on the bed, something caught my eye. The bed was wooden. The bottom part seemed to be a large drawer for storage. I wasn't staying multiple nights, so I didn't think I'd need it, but I idly pulled the handle. What caught my eye was a large old charm. It looked ancient, but I couldn't decipher the writing. It was covered in strange symbols, about 4 inches square each, densely drawn in thick ink on fabric. It felt strange, but I didn't pay it any more mind, and I closed the drawer. After finishing up my work, I wanted a drink. The vending machine was in the lobby. I pressed the button to take the elevator down, but it seemed to be stuck somewhere. Since I was on the 3rd floor, I decided to take the stairs, but I couldn't find them. As I searched down the dimly lit, winding hallway, I found a dirty white door that blended in with the wall. It wasn't marked as an emergency exit. Somehow, I figured it must be the stairs, so I opened the door. The hallway light was dim, and it was too dark to see inside, but from the feel of the air, I knew it wasn't a room, but a stairwell. I leaned halfway through the doorway, fumbled for the light switch, and pressed it. A dim, weak bulb flickered on in the ceiling. As the faint light illuminated the surroundings, my eyes immediately fell upon large sacks, over 3 feet tall, stacked up near me. On the white fabric of the sacks, the same symbols I'd seen earlier were densely drawn in black ink. There were 3 or 4 of these sacks on the landing. No, as my gaze drifted upwards in the dim light, I saw the same sacks stacked on the stairs leading to the upper floors. I thought they might be linen bags for sheets or laundry, but their shape was odd. Instead of being uniformly plump, they had irregular protrusions in places, and some parts were rounded and bulging. Some of the sacks seemed to be placed as if sitting on the stairs, others as if lying down. Whatever was inside, it certainly wasn't sheets or similar items. Nor did it feel like hard objects like iron. The fabric of the sacks was covered with that same dense, unreadable script. What in the world? I was utterly dumbfounded, unable to comprehend the situation. Then, for reasons I couldn't explain, I started to feel like I was seeing something I shouldn't. To my horror, that feeling solidified into a certainty as my eyes adjusted to the gloom. I had been staring at the stairs leading to the upper floor, where the light reached. But in the darkness of the landing below, where the light didn't reach, someone had been silently watching me. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of its shadow looming in the darkness. I desperately tried not to meet its gaze, and then I heard a low, raspy voice, a sound like it was tearing itself from a throat. At that moment, as I strained my eyes, several wrinkles on the sacks directly in front of me writhed. I fled from that spot and spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of my room. Later, when I tried to look it up, I wondered if the script I'd seen might have been some form of arcane ritualistic writing, but the meaning of those characters remains a mystery to me. Chapter 2. The Storm and the Old Couple. About 3 summers ago, I was on a motorcycle trip riding through the mountains of West Virginia. It had been clear up until then, but suddenly a few drops started to fall. By chance, I spotted what looked like a rest stop, or at least a parking area, so I pulled over to take a break. It was just a small parking lot with a restroom and a wooden shelter with a roof, a table, and benches. While I was in the restroom, the rain really started to come down hard. Thunder rumbled, and with no sign of it letting up, I decided to put on my rain gear and wait it out. I set my bag on the table to change, rustled around for my rain jacket, and then noticed an old couple sitting on one of the benches. I wondered when they'd arrived, as I hadn't seen them before, but the important thing was when the storm would pass. I finished changing and watched the sky for about 5 minutes, but the old couple remained silent the whole time. It felt a little awkward, so I decided to break the silence. "Came out of nowhere, didn't it?" I said, by way of greeting. The old couple exchanged a look, and then the old man said, "He's been digging for a long time." I thought, what's he talking about? It just started raining. But I kept my eyes on the sky, avoiding their gaze, and replied, "Yeah, I'm on my bike, so I can't really head out until it clears up." The old man paused for a couple of seconds, then said, "That's right, poor thing. Can't go home, can you?" I blinked. When I looked back at the bench, they were gone. I scanned the area, but there was no sign of them. A chill ran down my spine. This felt wrong. As I turned to leave, I thought I heard a shout in the distance. Then everything just went black. I snapped back to consciousness with a jolt, an older guy, maybe in his 30s, shaking my shoulder and asking if I was okay. He told me that when he came out of the restroom, he saw me climbing over the guardrail, about to dive off the cliff, and he rushed over to stop me. From the timing, I must have been unconscious for about 2 minutes. The heavy rain that had been falling had stopped, or rather, the guy said it hadn't rained at all. But I was wearing my rain jacket, and while there were no signs of rain on the road or the ground, my jacket was absolutely soaked. Chapter 3. The Overnight Guest. My aunt's family used to run a guest house when she was a child. Summers were busy with vacationers, and the guest house did a decent business. One day, a man showed up, asking for a room for the night. The man seemed a little agitated, as if he was afraid of something, or perhaps on guard. My aunt's parents, who ran the guest house, prepared a room for the man, and treated him like any other guest, as they always did. But my aunt, who was just a little girl, not even old enough for kindergarten yet, took one look at the man and suddenly started screaming. When her parents asked their crying daughter what was wrong, she just said the man scared her. Not wanting to be rude to their guest, they had their daughter go to another room. Early the next morning, the police arrived at the guest house. Apparently, a wanted suspect for robbery and murder had fled into the area. When they saw the suspect's photo, they were shocked to realize it was the man who had stayed with them the night before. The owners immediately handed the man over to the police. According to the police, the man had recently murdered an elderly woman, stolen her valuables, and fled, eventually making his way to their guest house. Hearing this, the owners were stunned once more, because the reason their daughter had said the man was scary the day before was that she was afraid of the old woman clinging to his back. Chapter 4. The Passenger Next Door. A few years ago, when I was living in Georgia, I took a high-speed train to visit my family back home. I think they still have them now, but since it was departing from Atlanta, I was able to get a seat in the unreserved car without a problem. However, because it was holiday travel season, it gradually became packed. But for some reason, no one sat in the seat next to me. You know how those trains have rows of 3 and rows of 2? I was in one of the 2-seater rows. Even people standing directly across the aisle from me didn't try to sit there. I thought it was strange, but after a few stops, an older woman who had been standing in the aisle after we passed through St. Louis finally sat down next to me. As soon as she sat down, she turned to me and asked, "Are you just going to let her go?" I was confused, so I asked her what she meant. She said, "The person who was sitting here until just now, she was talking to you the whole time, but you just ignored her, didn't you? It looks like she got off at the last stop, but are you really just going to let her go?" She said there was a young woman sitting there the whole time who kept talking towards me, and she thought she was with me. The fact that no one else sat there meant, did everyone else see her, not just the old woman? And was I the only one who couldn't see her? It was strangely terrifying. "What was she saying?" I asked. The old woman replied, "She seemed to be speaking quite loudly, I thought, but I couldn't make out a single word."
Chapter 5. The Counter Curse. It was when I stayed at my brother's house. That night, my brother and I were sleeping in adjoining rooms, separated by a thin partition. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep, but I suddenly woke up and felt a presence near the entrance of the room opposite the door. The moment I tried to turn my eyes towards it, I was struck by sleep paralysis. I could feel whatever it was drawing closer. Then it started circling around my bed. An abnormal weight pressed down on me as if I was being crushed, and the agony was unbearable. But I couldn't move. All I could do was groan. Just then, with a sudden rattle, the door slid open, and my brother burst in. "What in hell are you doing?" At that instant, the sleep paralysis lifted, and my body was free. We turned on the room light, and I managed to regain some composure, but an indescribable, eerie atmosphere still lingered. According to my brother, my groans had woken him. He'd felt a strange presence, so he'd cracked open the door to peek inside. He said that a robed figure was circling around my bed. My brother instinctively knew something was terribly wrong and burst in. It was so unsettling that the next day I asked a friend to introduce me to a psychic they knew, and I decided to consult them. That's when I was told something I never would have expected. According to the psychic, someone had placed a curse on me. The robed figure my brother saw was the one actually casting the curse, commissioned by this person. If my brother hadn't burst in, I likely would have lost my life. But I had absolutely no idea who would want to curse me or why. The psychic said I was in grave danger, so they performed a counter-ritual to reverse the curse. They also taught me a protective incantation, which they said was normally a closely guarded secret, on the condition that I never share it with anyone else. They explained that now the curse would rebound entirely onto the person who cast it, that is, the one who commissioned the dark practitioner. For a while after that, days passed without incident, perhaps thanks to the incantation. Then one of my colleagues at work suddenly died of heart failure. Everyone was truly shocked, as we all thought he was perfectly healthy. But in addition to the shock, I was gripped by an uncontrollable dread. Could it be that person? I have no way to confirm it now, but an unsettling feeling has lingered with me ever since. Chapter 6. The Old Man Next Door. A few summers ago, when I was in high school, I remember one day being incredibly hot and humid. It was the start of summer vacation, and I had nothing particular to do, so I had the AC blasting and was taking a nap. I'd only been awake for a few hours, so I guess I was still half asleep. Suddenly, my body became completely paralyzed. I'd never had a ghost experience before, but at the time I often experienced sleep paralysis, so I had a strange familiarity with it. And since it was daytime, I wasn't particularly scared. But after a while, with the paralysis still gripping me, I noticed something strange. I had the AC on, so I was under my comforter, and it was slowly, smoothly sliding off the bed. If it were just falling off because it wasn't properly on, it would start slow, but then drop with a thud from its own weight, right? But it wasn't like that. It was truly falling slowly, so slowly. It felt as if someone next to the bed was lifting the comforter and slowly, deliberately pulling it. I knew something was wrong. I was too terrified to open my eyes. And then, while still unable to move, I heard the comforter hit the floor with a soft thud. At that moment, I felt a presence right next to my bed. Even with my eyes closed, you can just sense someone's presence, right? I felt someone standing very close. Immediately after, I was truly terrified. A low male voice whispered right into my ear. I told myself not to open my eyes, no matter what, and just lay there motionless. I don't remember how much time passed, but the paralysis lifted and the presence was gone. I cautiously opened my eyes and looked around the room, but there was no one there. When I got out of bed, my comforter was indeed on the floor. I remember being drenched in sweat despite the AC blasting. I couldn't stand to be in that room any longer. I quickly changed and rushed over to my parents' place. They ran a restaurant nearby. I wanted to tell them what had just happened, but figured they wouldn't believe me anyway, so I just ate and left. Afterward, I went to a friend's house in the neighborhood and told them what happened. My friend didn't really believe me, but perhaps out of kindness, they hung out with me until almost midnight, doing karaoke and bowling and other stuff. I felt a lot better, and by the time I went home, the fear had somewhat faded. After taking a shower and going to my room, the daytime incident was still on my mind, but I decided not to dwell on it too much and tried to sleep. But I couldn't fall asleep easily, just tossing and turning in bed. As time passed, I gradually grew sleepy, and just as I thought I might finally drift off, I was struck by sleep paralysis again, just like in the afternoon. Then came an incredible noise. I couldn't even tell what it was. The sound wouldn't stop. It seemed to be coming from the wall at the foot of my bed. It sounded like someone was pounding on my bedroom wall. I tried to scream for my parents, but of course no sound came out. There was no presence this time, but I'll never forget the terror I felt then. The next thing I knew, it was morning. I must have fallen asleep without realizing it. Strangely, the memory was as clear as if it had just happened. I went downstairs and asked my parents, "Did you guys bang on my wall last night?" They replied, "Of course not. Why would we do that?" "Never mind that," my mom said. "The old man next door passed away. We're going to pay our respects later, so get ready." Goosebumps erupted all over my body. I told my parents everything that had happened since yesterday afternoon. My dad just said, "Well, that's something," and then fell silent. His reaction was so unnatural that I kept asking if something was up, but I couldn't get anything out of him. Recently, when my friend, my parents, and I were having dinner, and this story came up, my mom told me something. We still live in this house, but we moved in when I was in 8th grade. It wasn't a new build, it was an older house. Before us, a family of 4 lived here. That family had 2 close siblings, and the old man next door used to play with them often. The old man next door apparently didn't have any grandchildren of his own, so he must have doted on them like his own. But that family ended up moving away, and both the old man and the siblings were heartbroken. After that, the house was vacant for about a year, and by the time we moved in, the old man had fallen ill and was hospitalized. So while I'd spoken to others from the house next door, I'd never actually met the old man. My mom concluded he probably just wanted to see those kids again. I thought so too. I'll never forget the terror of that time, but I also felt a little bit of warmth.
Chapter 7. The 7 School Hauntings. Do you know about the 7 school hauntings? Things like the anatomy model in the science lab moving on its own, or a certain staircase gaining an extra step at a specific time, or the eyes of the Beethoven bust in the music room following you. They're basically urban legends specific to schools. I remember a terrifying experience related to them, so I'd like to share it here. As graduation for the seniors drew near, strange occurrences often plagued my school. Belongings vanished from desks all at once. Students suffered serious injuries in seemingly empty spaces. Steel beams from the gym ceiling would collapse, and fires would break out. Every time something like this happened, the teachers would tell us to be more careful. But because so many things beyond the realm of common sense kept happening one after another, a strange rumor began to circulate among the students. According to the rumor, our school also had its own set of 7 school hauntings, just like the ones you hear about everywhere. I thought it was all complete nonsense. But when a certain accident occurred, I felt a deep, primal fear of the 7 school hauntings. Incredibly, a friend of mine, Mark, died in an accident at school. Before the accident, he and a few other buddies had been messing around in the decommissioned rooftop pool, which had been drained at the end of last year. I don't know the full details, but apparently they were interested in the 7 school hauntings and were looking for clues. A few days later, he was found dead in the drained pool. He had swallowed so much of the stagnant water that had collected there, his stomach was grotesquely distended, and he had even ingested the algae and grime growing within, found in a bloated and decaying state. My friends and I were utterly stunned by what had happened. Mark wasn't just incredibly athletic and proactive, he was also smart and never did anything reckless. For a friend like that to die just from going to a drained pool, it was absurd. Even if it was an accident, would someone really die just from falling into a pool? Especially someone as athletic as him, it should have been impossible. I started to think that the 7 school hauntings, the very words he'd been so interested in, might have been the direct cause of his death. I wasn't the only one. I'm sure all of us, to varying degrees, were imagining something horrific about what had happened in that pool. All my friends' faces were terribly pale. A few days later, the topic of Mark's death became taboo among our group. We had all attended his funeral, been relentlessly questioned about him to the point of madness, and were mentally exhausted. Katie, who was always the most high-strung among us, must have reached her breaking point. She burst into the classroom, kicked a desk and chair with all her might, glared at everyone with bloodshot eyes, declared, "I can't take this anymore," and never came back to school after that. None of us could laugh at Katie. About 2 weeks after the accident, one afternoon after school, I was still in the classroom. It was around 6 in the evening. The sun had completely set, and the surroundings were dim. So what exactly are these 7 school hauntings anyway? I vaguely wondered. So far, the major incidents had been the sophomore classroom, where countless items disappeared from desks, the 3rd-floor hallway, where a student was seriously injured, the gym, where steel beams had fallen, the 1st-floor storage room that burned to the ground, and, of course, the drained pool. That's 5. If the 7 school hauntings were real, where would the remaining 2 happen, and what would occur? I couldn't even begin to imagine. The locations of the accidents and the severity of what happened seemed completely random. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 6, but it was already pitch black outside. For some reason, I suddenly felt uneasy. The recent accident and the words 7 school hauntings wouldn't leave my mind, making me extremely sensitive to my surroundings. The classroom felt incredibly eerie. Usually at this hour, about 45 students would still be here, studying, but I realized there wasn't a single soul. The neatly arranged rows of desks were strangely terrifying. Suddenly, with a loud scrape, the door by the blackboard opened. My heart nearly stopped, but it was just an old friend. He didn't even glance my way, just walked briskly to the desk by the window, grabbed a black bag hanging beside it, and then left the classroom immediately. "Don't scare me like that," I muttered, feeling a slight relief, but something still felt off. There was something wrong with my old friend just now. More than just looking strange, I suddenly understood what it was. My teeth began to chatter from sheer terror. The desk my friend had gone to and the black bag he'd taken both belonged to Mark, the friend who had died in the drained pool.
As he left the classroom, I could have sworn he looked back at me and smiled. I felt like I was losing my mind. I wanted to get out of that classroom as quickly as possible, but the thought of running into him again made my feet freeze. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and then took another. I looked at the clock. It was still just past 6. I had to get out of the classroom no matter what. It was simple. I just had to avoid him. Telling myself this, I bolted out of the classroom. No one. I ran down the hallway, past the empty classrooms, dashed up the stairs, and in no time reached the main exit lined with lockers. There, I froze. Someone was standing by the lockers. And when I looked closer, that person had the black bag from earlier in their hand. That was enough. Then the person turned to face me. It was Katie. Katie, who had declared, "I can't take this anymore," and hadn't come back to school since. "Katie," I shouted, rushing toward her, "it's you." Surprisingly, Katie seemed normal. Glancing at the black bag in her hand, I couldn't control myself and blurted out, "Where did you get that bag?" Katie stopped moving completely, staring into my eyes as if time itself had frozen. I flinched. Katie let out a low chuckle and said, "Do you really want to know that badly?" I was scared, so I just said, "I'm heading home now. See ya." Quickly put on my shoes and left Katie there. I rushed home and, still in my uniform, got into bed and fell asleep. The next day at school, the class was buzzing with whispers. I already had a bad feeling. As soon as I entered the classroom, I noticed a pungent, foul odor. It was an indescribable smell, like a backed-up drain or a stagnant ditch. My classmates were gathered at the back of the classroom, right where my desk was. I looked, and my desk was stained green, a sickly, murky green. What is this? I wondered. As I got closer, I saw it was covered in tiny, granular bits. It was unmistakably algae. I felt nauseous and instinctively covered my mouth. The drained pool. I couldn't be certain, but I was almost positive this was Katie's doing. What in the world was she thinking?
When I asked my friends, they all thought the same thing. But Katie, the crucial person, wasn't in the classroom. My friends and I went to the drained pool to look for her. The no entry sign by the stairs leading to the rooftop was smeared with algae and grime. My friends and I exchanged glances, and I reached for the door. It wasn't locked. The moment I opened the door and was about to step inside, an ear-splitting scream erupted. "It's Katie!" We all ran to the drained pool and saw Katie, covered in algae, screaming, thrashing, flailing her arms, completely out of control, like a person possessed. She was violently swinging the black bag she'd had yesterday, as if trying to ward something off. We could do nothing but watch the horrifying scene. Afterward, teachers who had been alerted by other students arrived, and Katie was restrained and taken away. The horror of that sight is still burned into my memory. I don't know what happened to Katie after that, and I still don't know what the 7 school hauntings truly were. After that, I asked my parents to arrange for me to transfer to a school in a different county. Nothing strange ever happened there, but even now, whenever I see a black bag, I simultaneously recall that eerie old friend who entered the classroom after school and Katie's crazed expression. Chapter 8. The Midnight Bell. It was a cold midnight in March in the narrow aisle of a convenience store. I was crouched down, browsing items on a lower shelf, when I heard the distinct jingle of a small bell right behind me. I instinctively straightened up, stepping aside to make room. But there was no one there. Was I imagining things? I scanned the store. The only other person was the clerk behind the counter. I was the sole customer. Must have misheard, I thought. I went back to looking at the items on the shelf. Then the bell jingled again. This time it came from the drink aisle at the very back. I frantically looked around, but of course there was no one there. The jingle slowly moved past the drink aisle, then further back, towards the fresh produce section. Then the sound stopped.
I continued browsing, putting a 2-liter bottle of iced tea into my basket. I was about to head to the prepared meal section to pick up a late-night snack. Just then, the bell jingled again. This time, it was slowly moving past the counter, heading towards the exit. In sync with its movement, the clerk, who had been reading a book, slowly moved his head, his eyes tracing the unseen source of the sound. "Something's making a strange noise, isn't it?" I said, addressing the clerk as he rang up my items. He kept his gaze fixed downwards, offering no reply. It felt incredibly odd. In the awkward silence, I paid for my purchases and quickly made my way towards the exit. As I reached the automatic doors of the exit, the clerk said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "It's always like this at this hour." Without a word, I walked out.
Chapter 9. The Dry Cleaners. The Dry Cleaners. This might not be a typical ghost story, but it happened just a week ago. There was a dry cleaners right behind my apartment building, and it was so convenient that I'd often pick up my clothes on the way home from work. I used it all the time. That night, after work, I was heading home, planning to walk past the dry cleaners as usual, but for some reason, the building wasn't there. The lot was completely empty. I wondered if there'd been a fire, but there were no signs of damage, no charred remains. I even considered if it had been torn down, but I'd used it just a few days prior and hadn't heard a single word about any such plans. Anyway, I still had clothes at the dry cleaners, so the next day I brought it up with my landlord during a casual chat. My landlord and the neighbors were all just as surprised as I was by how sudden it was. No one seemed to know when the building had been torn down or when the lot had been cleared. Apparently, the family who ran the dry cleaners and the building itself had simply vanished one day without a trace. It's become a strange local mystery, the talk of our neighborhood. More importantly, what on earth happened to my dry cleaning? My coat, my shirts, all my clothes? I'm really in a bind. Seriously, I need them back. If you cleaned them, please just return them. Chapter 10. A premonition. I never thought I'd actually experience something like this. But about 2 weeks ago, I got a call from a friend I went to middle school with. We weren't particularly close and hadn't seen each other in over 5 years. So why now? I figured it was a sales call, maybe for a water filter, so I answered the phone. After we'd chatted about this and that and caught up on other classmates, my friend suddenly said, "I had a really strange dream." Apparently, in the dream, I told him that he wouldn't be able to see me again. "I was worried something might have happened to you," he said. "I'm glad you're okay. I feel relieved," he said, and then hung up. But I wasn't relieved at all. Someone dying suddenly, shortly after appearing in a dream like that, isn't that exactly how these kinds of stories go? From then on, I paid extreme attention to my daily life. I switched from riding my motorcycle to taking the train, always obeyed pedestrian signals, and lived a disciplined life for my health. My friend's story was far too terrifying for me to take lightly. Then, about a week ago, I received news that my friend had died in a motorcycle accident. He was killed instantly, they said. After the funeral was over and I finally had a moment to breathe, it hit me. My friend's dream of not being able to see me again wasn't about me at all. It was about him. I still don't fully understand it, but I guess some premonitions work that way. Chapter 11. The Seer. I have a friend who's what you'd call a seer. According to her, even among people who can see things, not everyone sees everything. Apparently, people who can see guardian angels are pretty rare. On the other hand, evil spirits are a dime a dozen, so most people can see those. I was listening to her talk about all this over dinner at a diner when she dropped something that sent a chill down my spine. It went something like this. "Oh, the person behind that guy is a bit reserved." "Reserved? What do you mean?" "Well, they're walking a little further away. Maybe it's a weaker connection." "Do I have one? A person behind me?" "Of course you do, right now even." "What's mine like?" "Is it sitting in the seat behind me?" "No, it's always behind you, even if there's a wall."
Behind me? I don't really get it. What was that person like that you mentioned earlier anyway? When you said walking further away, how far away were they walking? About this far, she said, and then made a small gap with her thumb and index finger, as if measuring something invisible. And that's far away? That's pretty... Wait, so what about normal people? About this far. She walked around behind me and waved her hand around the space where this person was supposedly standing, right above my left shoulder. Whoa, I blurted out, but apparently she always has a person resting its chin right on her shoulder. Not just her, but probably most people reading this, too. I don't have any psychic abilities, and I've never seen a spirit in my life. But ever since she told me that, the air around my left shoulder has felt strangely heavy. So, everyone, imagine that there's always another face right next to your own.
These tales, each a glimpse into the unsettling, remind us that the veil between the known and the unknown is often thinner than we dare to imagine. From silent watchers in the dark to vanishing places and unseen companions, perhaps the most profound mysteries aren't far-off monsters, but the quiet distortions in our everyday lives. What if what we perceive as reality is merely a fraction of what truly exists? Thank you for listening. As you go about your day, perhaps take a moment to consider what or who might be just beyond your sight, or right over your shoulder.